Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're firing up the Startup Foundry, really looking at what it takes to build something completely new. Not, just tweaking what's already out there, what our source material calls one to N, but that big leap, creating something totally original, going from 0 to 1.
That's the core idea, and we're digging into the notes, basically, from Peter Thiel's book, 0 to 1, notes originally taken by Blake Masters.
Right. And Thiel, if you follow tech at all, you know the name. PayPal co-founder, Palantir co-founder, early investor in Facebook, SpaceX.
Yeah.
The list goes on.
Yeah, and Masters' notes from Thiel's Stanford class, CS-183, they became kind of legendary online before they even turned into the book. They really capture Thiel's, let's say, unique perspective.
Shaped by building and backing some really transformative companies.
Exactly.
So our mission today, let's try and unpack that perspective. What are the core principles, the blueprints maybe, for building companies that actually create new value? How do you make that jump from 0 to 1? Let's get into it. So right off the bat, there's this really critical distinction made. 0 to 1 versus 1 to N. Why is that separation so fundamental?
Well, it defines two completely different ways progress can happen. Think of 1 to N as horizontal progress, globalization, basically. You take something that works, maybe in the US, and you copy it everywhere else, like China building out high-speed rail using existing tech. You're scaling a known model. It's easier, you have a template.
Okay, so 1 to N is copying, scaling. Got it. What about 0 to 1 then?
That's the vertical leap, technology. It's creating something brand new. A fundamentally better way of doing something that it didn't exist before. That act of creation, it's singular, it happens once, it results in something completely novel.
And the argument, a strong one, is that 0 to 1 actually matters more. Why is just spreading the old stuff, the 1 to N, why is that seen as unsustainable?
Because fundamentally, without new technology, without that 0 to 1 progress, just duplicating existing methods runs into hard limits. Resource scarcity is the big one. The book uses some stark examples, right? Like if China just doubles energy output using today's tech, pollution doubles. If everyone in India lived like Americans do now with current tools, well, the environmental cost would be catastrophic.
Right. So real progress, like doing more with less, needs that technological leap.
Exactly. It requires genuine innovation.
And where does this innovation, this new tech, usually come from?
Increasingly, it comes from new ventures, startups. It's hard to do truly new things in huge organizations, too much bureaucracy, too many existing interests to protect, and trying to do it totally alone, almost impossible. So startups are kind of this sweet spot. Small, focused groups united by a mission to build a different future.
Which brings us to that definition in the book. A startup is the largest group of people you can convince of a plan to build a different future.
Yeah, it's a great definition. Their power isn't just about being small and fast. It's about having the space, the mandate, really, to think differently, to question assumptions.
And that questioning leads stored into this idea of thinking contrarian, finding secrets. It kicks off with that really probing question. What important truth do very few people agree with you on?
That question, it's designed to get beneath the surface. A good answer isn't just, being edgy or different for the sake of it. It reveals a potentially non-obvious truth about the present. And that insight can give you a glimpse into the future because the future has to look different from today, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes the easiest way to find such a truth is to start by identifying a popular belief that just feels wrong, maybe even delusional. Like the saying goes, madness is rare in individuals, but in groups, it is the rule.
Okay, like the common belief that the future is mainly going to be shaped by globalization.
Exactly. Thiel's contrarian take is, no, technology matters more. Without new tech, just spreading existing ways leads us towards conflict over scarce resources, not universal prosperity.
There's also this other belief, the book tackles this kind of, resignation, that there are no big secrets left to find. Everything important's been discovered.
Oh yeah, that's a pervasive one. And it's dangerous because it breeds incrementalism. Why bother trying to create something radically new if you believe all the low-hanging fruit, and even the high-hanging fruit, is gone? It leads to risk aversion and this sometimes misplaced faith in efficient markets, the idea that prices always reflect all information, which, bubbles like 1999 or the 2008 crisis kind of blew holes in.
So if secrets do exist, what are they like? What's the definition here?
The source defines them as important truths that are not yet wisely known. They're hard to find, maybe hard to act on, but they are fundamentally discoverable, doable. And the most valuable secrets for founders are often what the book calls open but unsuspected secrets.
Open but unsuspected. I like that. It suggests the clues are out there, but people aren't connecting the dots.
Precisely. Think about Airbnb. The secret was the massive, untapped inventory of spare rooms in people's homes. The asset existed, but nobody saw it as the basis for a global hospitality giant.
Or Uber and Lyft.
Same idea. The secret was seeing the potential in connecting existing drivers with existing cars to people who needed rides, using mobile tech. Simple idea, right? Seems obvious now. But that simplicity often means they get underestimated at first.
Are there different kinds of secrets we should be looking for?
Yeah, the book mentions secrets about nature's scientific discoveries, new laws of physics, maybe, but it really emphasizes secrets about people. What are people not saying? What's considered forbidden or taboo to discuss? What truths are inconvenient?
Can you give an example of one of those human secrets relevant to building a business?
Sure. A big one highlighted is the idea that, in practice, capitalism and competition are sort of opposites.
Whoa, okay. That definitely feels contrarian. We're always taught competition's the engine of capitalism.
Right. But the argument is that perfect competition drives profits down to zero. Firms become undifferentiated commodities, just struggling to survive. That truth gets hidden because companies in competitive markets desperately try to exaggerate their uniqueness, while companies that actually have a monopoly try to downplay it to avoid scrutiny.
Interesting. So if you think you found one of these secrets, who do you tell?
The advice is pretty stark. Tell only the people you absolutely need to build the thing. Think of a great company, the book suggests, as a kind of conspiracy to change the world. You share the secret, the plan, with your co-conspirators. That binds you together.
Okay, this leads us right into maybe the most provocative chapter, title, or idea in the whole book. Competition is for losers. Basically, competition is bad, monopoly is good.
Yeah, that one definitely turns heads. It completely flips conventional economic thinking. The standard economics 101 view is that perfect competition is the ideal. Good for consumers, keeps companies efficient.
But the argument here is that it's actually a death trap.
Pretty much. Perfect competition means no real profits, no buffer, no resources to invest in risky long-term R&D. You're just scrambling for survival, focused on beating the other guy by a penny.
And the alternative is monopoly. But that sounds bad too, like price gouging.
Right, but the distinction is crucial. We're talking about a creative monopoly, a company that creates something so new and valuable that it dominates a market it created. Think Apple with the iPhone initially. The huge profits they made weren't from ripping people off, the argument goes. They were the reward for creating immense new value, creating abundance. Economists often model monopolies as static rent seekers, just collecting tolls. But in the real dynamic world, these creative monopolies are arguably the engines of progress.
So the potential for those future monopoly profits is the big incentive to innovate.
Exactly. That promise justifies the immense risk and investment needed for true 0-to-1 breakthroughs. And just as importantly, having those monopoly profits later gives the company the financial freedom to make long-term plans, to fund ambitious research, maybe even fund the next breakthrough things a company barely breaking even in a competitive market could never dream of.
The book also warns about something called competitive lies. What's that about?
It's this bias entrepreneurs have to define their market so narrowly that it looks like they have no competitors. The classic example given is claiming to be the only British restaurant in Palo Alto.
Right, but your real competition is every other restaurant people could choose instead.
Precisely. Focusing on tiny, irrelevant points of difference, or non-bread is slightly better, while ignoring the brutal reality of the broader competitive landscape is, well, it's often fatal.
And getting caught up in rivalry itself seems dangerous.
Hugely distracting. Can be totally destructive. The book mentions the long-running personal feud between Larry Ellison at Oracle and Tom Siebel at Siebel Systems, or even the early days of PayPal versus Elon Musk's X.com. That rivalry was apparently incredibly intense, maybe even wasteful, until they realized the bigger threat was the dot-com crash looming over both of them. That forced a merger. Competition makes you obsessed with your rivals, not necessarily with creating value or looking ahead.
So if you do find yourself in a fight,
the advice is, if you have to fight, fight to win decisively and quickly. Don't get bogged down in a long war of attrition. Recognizing competition as fundamentally destructive, not beneficial, is the first step.
Okay, so you aim for monopoly, not competition. But it's not enough just to achieve a monopoly, right?
Yeah.
It needs to last. This brings in the idea of durability and the last mover.
That's key. Because the value of any business, especially a tech business, isn't just this quarter's earnings. It's the total sum of all the money it will make over its entire future lifespan, discounted back to today's value. For businesses with slow growth, like, say, a newspaper or maybe that British restaurant, most of the value is tied up in near-term cash flows. But for tech companies, they often lose money for years. Think about PayPal or LinkedIn early on. Almost all their value comes from the expectation of big profits 10, 15, even 20 years out.
Which sounds like a pretty strong warning against getting obsessed with short-term metrics.
Absolutely. It's a direct critique of what's called measurement mania, focusing only on things you can easily count right now, like monthly active users or website hits, while ignoring the deeper, harder, more qualitative questions like, will this business actually still be around and kicking in a decade or more? That requires thinking critically about the nature of the business, not just the current numbers.
So what gives a business that durability? What are the characteristics of a lasting monopoly, a potential last mover?
The book highlights 4 main characteristics, and usually strong companies have a combination of these.
Okay, what's the first one?
Proprietary technology. This is your core advantage. It needs to be really hard or impossible for others to replicate, and crucially, it needs to be at least 10 times better than the closest substitute on some key dimension.
10 times. Why such a high bar?
Because anything less, like a 2x improvement, is often just seen as a marginal gain. It's hard to get people to switch for that. A 10x improvement is dramatic. Think Google's search results versus Alta Vista back in the day, or PayPal making online payments way easier than mailing checks, Amazon's initial huge selection, Apple's integrated design for the iPad. It can be something totally new or just a radical improvement.
Makes sense. What's number 2?
Network effects. This is when your product becomes more valuable the more people use it. Obvious examples are social networks like Facebook or marketplaces like eBay. The key insight here, though, is that you must start with a very small, specific market first. Get it locked down. Achieve critical mass there before you try to go broad. Facebook didn't launch to the world. It launched just for Harvard students. That initial density is crucial.
Okay, tech advantage, network effects. What else?
Third is economies of scale. Does the business get inherently stronger and more cost-efficient as it gets bigger? Software businesses are classic examples here. The cost to serve the millionth user is basically zero once the software is built. Fixed costs get spread over more and more customers.
And the last one?
Branding. Building a powerful, unique identity. Apple is maybe the prime example. But the crucial caveat here, especially for tech, is that the brand has to be built on a foundation of substance. You can't just start with a cool logo and slick marketing if the underlying tech or product isn't great. Brand follows substance, not the other way around. Think Yahoo's struggles versus Apple's resurgence under Jobs.
So you have some combination of these. How do you scale up effectively? You mentioned starting small with network effects.
Right. The strategy is dominate a specific niche first. Be the clear king of that small hill. Then methodically expand into adjacent markets. Amazon is the textbook case. Start with books. Become Earth's largest bookstore. Then CDs and videos. Then electronics. Then everything. It requires real discipline in sequencing those market expansions.
And there's this interesting piece of advice. Don't disrupt. That feels counter to a lot of startup talk.
It does, doesn't it? Disruption has become this buzzword, often meaning picking a fight with established players. The argument here is that it's usually much smarter to avoid direct competition. Either create a totally new market the incumbents aren't even thinking about, or expand the overall pie in a way they don't serve well. PayPal didn't set out to destroy Visa. It focused on enabling online payments, which actually grew the whole market, benefiting Visa too. Avoid those head-on, often negative-sum battles if you can.
So the ultimate goal isn't just first mover, but last mover.
Exactly. You don't have to be the first company to try something, but you want to be the last one to make the definitive breakthrough improvement in that market, allowing you to capture those durable monopoly profits for years to come. It's like chess. You need to study the end game, understand what winning looks like right from the beginning.
Thinking about planning that end game brings up that classic question. How much of startup success is just pure luck versus deliberate design and skill? The source seems to lean pretty heavily one way.
It does. It acknowledges that many successful people attribute their success to luck, and yeah, it's impossible to run the control experiment. But the core argument is that treating the future as fundamentally unknowable and random, what the book calls an indefinite view of the future, is a self-limiting belief. It leads you to give up on trying to actively shape it.
What happens when people adopt that indefinite mindset?
They tend to focus on process over substance. Like, instead of having a concrete plan for what they want to build, they just try to accumulate credentials and skills to keep their options open for whatever the uncertain future might bring. Building a broad resume, being ready for anything, which can mean being ready for nothing in particular.
The book even touches on how whole societies can have different attitudes towards the future, right?
Yeah, briefly. It sketches out 4 views. Indefinite pessimism, like modern Europe, maybe, expecting decline without a plan. Definite pessimism, like China, planning meticulously but perhaps bracing for future challenges. Indefinite optimism, like the US since the 60s, 70s, generally believing things will get better but without grand specific plans. And definite optimism, like the West during the scientific revolution up to the mid-20th century, believing in progress and actively building specific, ambitious projects. The argument favors definite optimism for real breakthroughs.
And in an indefinite world, money becomes the goal itself.
Because money represents optionality, right? Flexibility in an uncertain future. But in a definite future, where you have a plan, money is just a means to achieve that plan.
How does this connect back to startups specifically?
A startup is presented as maybe the largest scale endeavor where you can still exercise definite mastery. You can actually shape a part of the world according to a plan. It's about agency. It counters that feeling of being just tossed around by forces beyond your control. As the book says really powerfully, you are not a lottery ticket. You can choose to make definite plans and try to build a specific future.
But to build that future, you absolutely have to nail the beginning. This brings us to what the source calls Thiel's law.
Yeah, it's a strong claim. A startup messed up at its foundation cannot be fixed. The idea is that those initial decisions, who you start with, the initial rules, the early culture, they have this outsized, almost irreversible impact. Getting the foundation right is paramount.
And what's the single most critical foundational decision?
Choosing your co-founders. The analogy used is marriage, and it's apt. Founder conflict is like divorce, incredibly painful and often fatal to the company. It's not just about complementary skills on paper. It's about whether you have a shared history, deep trust, and the ability to actually work through disagreements constructively. You need that pre-existing relationship, ideally. It's not someone you just met at a networking event.
Okay, beyond the founders, what about building out the very early team?
Everyone you bring on in those early days needs to be genuinely excited about the specific mission and excited about working with you and the rest of the team. Recruiting isn't just an HR function you delegate. It's core to the founder's job. You have to be able to answer that crucial question. Why should the 20th employee, a talented engineer or salesperson, join your tiny, risky startup instead of taking a safe, high-paying job at Google? Generic pitches about stock options won't cut it. It's about the unique opportunity to do irreplaceable work on a compelling problem with great people.
Avoid the perk wars, then.
Yeah, the source argues against competing on fancy lunches or on-site massages. Offer the basics, sure, but the real draw should be the substance of the work and the quality of the team. The early PayPal team, famously, was full of people who shared similar interests. They were the same kind of nerd, which helped create cohesion around the mission.
And inside the company, how do you structure things to minimize friction?
A key principle. Make every single person responsible for just one unique thing, their specific domain. This avoids overlapping responsibilities, which breeds resentment and internal competition. Internal conflict is described as like an autoimmune disease. The company starts attacking itself, making it vulnerable.
What about compensation structure in those early days?
Everyone, full-time. That's a strong recommendation. Avoid consultants, part-timers, even remote work if you can manage it in the very beginning, because misalignment can creep in easily. It's about commitment. You're either on the bus or off the bus.
And CEO, pay for an early stage, venture-backed startup, keep it low. The suggestion is under $150,000. Why? Because a high CEO salary incentivizes protecting the status quo, protecting that salary. A low salary keeps the CEO relentlessly focused on increasing the value of the company to equity, which benefits everyone. It sets the right example from the top.
Which leads to the cash versus equity question.
Right. High cash compensation tends to reward extracting or reclaiming existing value. It's very present-focused. Equity, however, is the best tool for aligning everyone towards creating future value. Accepting equity over cash signals a belief in the long-term potential and a commitment to building it.
But figuring out how much equity everyone gets, that sounds incredibly tricky. It's a minefield, because perfect fairness is impossible. Equal shares are rarely fair, given different roles, timing, and risk levels. But unequal shares inevitably feel unfair to someone. Because that potential for resentment is so damaging, the book actually suggests keeping the specific details of individual equity grants secret within the company. You just can't make it perfectly fair, and transparency might just fuel division. Generally, earlier employees take more risk, they get more equity.
It really sounds like that founding moment, those initial choices, they just echo down the years. They set the company's DNA.
They absolutely do. It's a singular moment in time, and it sets the trajectory. And that founding period, the book argues, can actually extend as long as the company remains in that 0 to 1 mode, actively creating new things, not just managing its past successes.
Okay, so foundation is set, definite plan, maybe a secret, the right team aiming for a durable monopoly. What's a piece that gets perhaps dangerously underrated? Distribution. Actually selling the thing.
Oh, massively underrated, especially in tech circles in Silicon Valley. There's this persistent field of dreams bias. If you build an amazing product, customers will just find it, magically show up.
Which doesn't happen.
Almost never. You have to actively, deliberately figure out how to get your product to customers. You have to sell it.
And the source really emphasizes how sales is this huge critical part of the economy, yet engineers and technical people often look down on it.
Yeah, there's often a skepticism, maybe because it seems less concrete than code or somehow superficial. But sales works. Advertising works. Marketing works. These things shape perception and drive behavior. And the importance of sales skill is often hidden, but it's arguably what distinguishes the very top performers in fields far beyond business law, politics, even academia. It's the ability to sell your ideas, your research, yourself.
So that common refrain, a great product sells itself.
Yeah.
Just a myth.
A dangerous myth, yeah. A brilliant product with no viable way to reach customers is, unfortunately, just a bad business. Distribution isn't an afterthought you tack on at the end. It has to be considered core to the product and strategy from the beginning. In fact, sometimes superior distribution can even create a quasi-monopoly for a product that isn't hugely differentiated. But the reverse, CAC, a great product with bad distribution almost never works.
What's the fundamental economic constraint on distribution?
It boils down to simple math. The total value you get from a customer over their lifetime, customer lifetime value, or CLV, has to be significantly greater than the amount you spend to acquire that customer acquisition cost, or CAC. CLV-CAC, that's the rule. And generally, the higher the price of your product, the more you can afford to spend on CAC, which opens up different distribution channels.
Right. The book outlines a kind of spectrum of distribution methods based on that deal size or price point.
Exactly. At the very high end, for deals worth millions, you have complex sales. This is relationship-driven, and maybe only a few deals per year, requires direct involvement from the CEO. Think SpaceX selling rocket launches to NASA. Then, for deals in the, say, $10,000 to $100,000 range, you typically need personal sales. Building a sales team, cultivating leads, managing accounts. Think enterprise software companies like Box selling to large organizations, or ZocDoc selling its scheduling software to doctors' offices.
Okay, then lower price points.
Below that, maybe in the hundreds or low thousands, you start getting into marketing and advertising. But the caution here is that broad advertising is usually only effective for established brands with big budgets. It rarely works for early-stage startups trying to get noticed. Remember PayPal's early attempt at an ad campaign with James Duhanscotty from Star Trek? Total flop.
Yeah, and at the very low end.
For products that cost maybe $10 or less, or are free, the only viable channel is often viral marketing. The product has to be inherently designed so that users bring in other users. Think Facebook's growth, or how PayPal kickstarted things by literally paying users small amounts to refer their friends. It's potentially the cheapest and fastest channel if you can make it work.
And what's the strategic takeaway about picking one of these?
It usually follows the power law. Meaning, for most successful businesses, one single distribution channel tends to dominate and be far more effective than all others combined. Finding and mastering that one key channel is critical. Dabbling ineffectually across several is a common recipe for failure. More startups probably fail from bad distribution than bad product.
And selling isn't just about getting customers to buy the product, is it?
No, absolutely not. You're constantly selling. You have to sell your vision to potential employees to get them to join. That's recruiting. You have to sell your company's potential to investors to get funding. That's pitching. You even need to sell your story to the media, because public perception and what comes up when people search for you really matters.
So the realization is everyone's in sales, whether they admit it or not.
Pretty much. If you look around your startup and you don't see anyone obviously doing sales, chances are it's supposed to be you.
Okay, shifting gears towards the future now. The source takes on the big question of humans and machines, especially with AI and computing power advancing so rapidly. There's a lot of anxiety about computers taking over jobs.
Yeah, that fear is definitely out there. And it's understandable when you see computers beat grandmasters at chess or win Jeopardy. But the core argument in 0 to 1 is actually quite optimistic here. It argues that computers are fundamentally complements to humans, not substitutes.
Complements, not substitutes. How so? What's the difference?
They're just categorically different kinds of intelligence. Humans excel at planning, complex decision-making in novel situations, judgment, asking broad questions, things involving intention. We're terrible, though, at processing massive amounts of data quickly. Computers are the reverse. Amazing at sifting through huge data sets, finding patterns, executing defined tasks flawlessly millions of times. But they struggle with common sense, real-world ambiguity, and genuine understanding or intention. The classic example is how much labeled data Google needed just to get reasonably good at identifying cat pictures, something a toddler does instantly.
So the real breakthroughs happen when humans and computers work together.
Exactly. The synergy, the gains from man-machine complementarity are potentially enormous, much greater than humans just competing against machines or even humans competing against other humans using old tools. Technology, used right, empowers people and helps us escape zero-sum competition by creating new frontiers. The most valuable businesses of the future, the argument goes, will be the ones that best empower people with computers.
The PayPal fraud detection story is a great example of this from the book itself.
It's a perfect illustration. Their initial attempts to fully automate fraud detection failed because the criminals were smart and adapted quickly. What did work dramatically well was a hybrid system. Computers flagged potentially suspicious transactions based on patterns, but human analysts, nicknamed Igor, internally made the final judgment call. That synthesis saved the company and really enabled e-commerce as we know it. Palantir was then founded explicitly on that principle, building software to help human experts make sense of complex, disparate data for really hard problems, counterterrorism, financial fraud, disease tracking. The human element is critical.
So this suggests that in fields like medicine, law, education, technology won't just replace the professionals.
It shouldn't, and the most valuable tech won't aim to. It should augment them. Give doctors, lawyers, teachers powerful tools to analyze data, find information, automate routine tasks so they can focus their uniquely human skills, judgment, empathy, communication, creative problem solving more effectively. There's a bit of a critique in the book of a certain strain in computer science that seems overly focused on replacing humans, which can lead to things like big data becoming dumb data without that crucial layer of human interpretation and context.
So the key question we should be asking isn't, what problems can computers solve all by themselves?
Right. It should be more like, how can computers help humans solve hard problems that neither could solve effectively alone? The prospect of strong AI, machines becoming fully conscious and replacing us entirely, that's treated as a very distant, indefinite fear. We shouldn't let that kind of sci-fi worry stop us from making definite plans today to use the powerful computing tools we do have to achieve things that were previously unimaginable.
Wow, okay. We've covered a huge amount of ground there. From the foundational ideas about 0 to 1 and secrets, through competition, durability, teams, distribution, and now human-computer collaboration. The source wraps things up by suggesting there are maybe 7 key questions any startup really needs to answer well.
Yeah.
Let's quickly recap those.
Sure. It's a good checklist. 1. The engineering question, can you create breakthrough technology instead of just incremental improvements? 2. Timing. Is now the right time to start this particular business? 3. Monopoly. Are you starting with a big share of a small, specific market? 4. People. Do you have the right team on the bus? 5. Distribution. Do you have a way to not just create, but deliver your product? 6. Durability. Will your market position be defensible 10, 20 years into the future? And 7. The secret. Have you identified a unique opportunity that others don't see? And the clean tech bubble of the 2000s is used as kind of a cautionary tale, right? An entire sector that mostly failed because they didn't have good answers to many of these.
Exactly. A lot of those companies, the tech wasn't truly 10x better. Sometimes it was barely parity or worse. The timing was arguably obvious. They bet on linear trends while innovations like fracking changed the energy landscape. Many lacked clear distribution plans. And crucially, many lacked a real secret. Just relying on the general, widely known idea that green is good isn't a unique insight to build a monopoly around. They were competing head-on in a difficult market without strong advantages.
But interestingly, Tesla, operating in that same general space, is held up as an example of getting those questions mostly right.
Yeah, Tesla had proprietary tech that was genuinely desirable, not just functional. They arguably timed government subsidies well. They built a powerful brand based partly on the secret that clean tech could be aspirational and high performance, appealing to affluent buyers first. They started niche, high-end sports car, and are scaling from there, leveraging potential network effects around charging and economies of scale in manufacturing. So yeah, the core theme woven through all these ideas is that building something truly new, that 0 to 1 leap, it's incredibly hard work. It requires deliberate, definite thinking. It requires finding those non-obvious secrets. It means actively avoiding the siren song of competition, building an exceptionally aligned team, mastering distribution, and leveraging the powerful synergy between people and computers.
It really does feel like we've been exploring the blueprint for a startup foundry, taking those raw materials of ideas and people and forging them into something lasting and valuable.
That's a good way to put it. It's about that intentional act of creation, starting with a clear vision and the courage to look for truths where others aren't looking.
So maybe the final thought for you listening is just that. What important, valuable new thing do you see that isn't being built right now? What unique insight, what secret about the world or about people might you have uncovered that could be the foundation for creating something truly new?
And remember that core message. You are not a lottery ticket. You have agency. You can choose to try and build a definite future.
A really powerful idea to end on. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into building the future 0 to 1.